You thought being an adult meant freedom. Doing what you want. Living how you choose. But adulthood turned out to be bills, exhaustion, and realizing nobody actually knows what they're doing. What if everything you were told about growing up was a lie? What if freedom meant more responsibility, not less? What if the exciting life you imagined is just work, sleep, repeat? Because childhood promised you adventure. And adulthood delivered survival. And the gap between what you expected and what you got is crushing. Welcome to Unfiltered Adulthood, where we explore the quiet psychological shifts that reshape you in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. If this resonates, subscribe and hit like. There's someone who spent their entire childhood waiting to grow up. Waiting for the day they'd finally be free. Free from rules. Free from being told what to do. Free to live the life they wanted. They watched adults and thought, that's going to be me. I'll have my own place. My own money. My own choices. I'll do what I want, when I want. Life will finally be mine. And they had a vision. A clear picture of what adult life would look like. They'd have a job they loved. An apartment that felt like home. Friends who were always available. Weekends full of adventures. Money to do things. Time to enjoy life. Freedom to make their own decisions without asking permission. It looked exciting. It looked fun. It looked like everything childhood wasn't. So they waited. Endured school. Followed the rules. Did what they were supposed to do. Because adulthood was the reward. The finish line. The moment when life would finally start being what they wanted it to be. And then they grew up. Got the job. Got the apartment. Got the supposed freedom. And it wasn't anything like they imagined. The job wasn't something they loved. It was something that paid the bills. And the bills were endless. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Insurance. Student loans. Credit cards. Things they never thought about as a kid but now consumed most of their paycheck. The money they thought they'd have didn't exist. Because it was already spoken for before they even earned it. The apartment didn't feel like freedom. It felt like pressure. Another bill. Another responsibility. Another thing to maintain. The friends weren't always available. They were busy. Tired. Dealing with their own lives. The spontaneous hangouts of childhood were replaced with, let me check my calendar, and plans made weeks in advance that often got cancelled. The weekends weren't adventures. They were recovery. Recovering from the week. Catching up on chores. Doing laundry. Grocery shopping. Cleaning. All the invisible labor that nobody told them about. And by the time they finished everything they had to do, they were too tired to do anything they wanted to do. And the freedom? The freedom they'd been promised? It didn't feel like freedom at all. It felt like a different kind of trap. Because every choice came with consequences they were solely responsible for. Every decision had weight. Every mistake was theirs to fix. And nobody was there to catch them if they fell. They started to realize something uncomfortable. That the adults they'd looked up to as a kid probably didn't have it figured out either. That everyone was just making it up as they went along. That there was no moment when you suddenly felt like a real adult. You just kept getting older and the responsibilities kept piling up and you kept pretending you knew what you were doing. The exciting life they'd imagined didn't happen. Life wasn't an adventure. It was a routine. Wake up. Work. Come home. Make dinner. Clean up. Sleep. Repeat. Week after week. Month after month. The days blurred together. And they started to wonder, is this it? Is this what I was waiting for my whole childhood? They'd been sold a narrative. That growing up meant arrival. That once you became an adult, life would be better. Easier. More fun. But the narrative was a lie. Or at least a massive oversimplification. Because nobody mentioned the mundane reality. The constant low-level stress. The financial pressure. The loneliness. The exhaustion. The realization that you're responsible for everything and nobody is coming to save you. They looked at social media and it made it worse. Because everyone else seemed to be living the life they'd imagined. Traveling. Happy. Successful. Living in beautiful places. Having fun. And they were just trying to make rent and remember to buy toilet paper. The gap between expectation and reality felt personal. Like they'd somehow failed at adulthood. Like everyone else got the memo on how to make it work and they'd missed it. But the truth was harder and more freeing at the same time. That almost everyone felt this way. That the exciting adult life was largely a myth. Or at least reserved for a very small percentage of people. That most people were just getting by. Working jobs they tolerated to pay for lives that felt smaller than they'd hoped. That the confusion and disappointment weren't personal failures. They were structural realities. An understanding that didn't make it better. But it made it less lonely. Because the problem wasn't them. It was the lie they'd been told about what growing up would be. They started to adjust. To grieve the life they'd imagined and accept the one they had. And that grief was real. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a breakdown. It was just a quiet letting go. Of the fantasy. Of the expectation that life would feel different than it did. Of the belief that they were somehow doing it wrong. They learned to find small pleasures in the routine. The coffee in the morning. The moment of quiet after work. The rare weekend when they actually had energy and time to do something they wanted. It wasn't the adventure they'd imagined. But it was something. And it was theirs. They stopped comparing their reality to other people's highlight reels. Stopped measuring their life against the fantasy version they'd constructed as a kid. Started appreciating what they had instead of resenting what they didn't. Not because they gave up. But because acceptance felt better than constant disappointment. They realized that maybe the point wasn't to have the perfect exciting life. Maybe the point was to build a life they could sustain. That didn't break them. That had moments of joy even if it wasn't constant adventure. That felt manageable even if it wasn't what they'd dreamed. And they learned something their younger self didn't know. That freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's choosing which responsibilities to take on. That adulthood isn't about having it all figured out. It's about being okay with not knowing. That growing up isn't an arrival. It's a process. And the process is ongoing. And maybe that's the actual lesson childhood never teaches you. That life isn't about reaching some perfect endpoint. It's about navigating the messy middle. And learning to be okay with it. They still had moments of disappointment. Still felt the gap between what they'd imagined and what they had. Still wondered what happened to the exciting life they'd been promised. But they also had moments of appreciation. For the stability they'd built. For the small freedoms they did have. For the life that wasn't perfect but was real. The fantasy version of adulthood died. But something more honest took its place. A life that wasn't a movie. Wasn't an adventure. Wasn't what they'd imagined. But was theirs. With all its boring routines and small pleasures and endless responsibilities. And learning to live in that reality instead of mourning the fantasy was its own kind of growing up. You thought being an adult meant freedom. Doing what you want. Living how you choose. But adulthood turned out to be bills, exhaustion, and realizing nobody knows what they're doing. Everything you were told about growing up was a lie. Or at least incomplete. Freedom means more responsibility, not less. The exciting life you imagined is work, sleep, repeat. Childhood promised you adventure. Adulthood delivered survival. And the gap between expectation and reality is crushing. But the gap isn't your fault. It's not personal failure. It's the difference between the story we're sold and the life we actually live. And once you stop trying to live the fantasy and start accepting the reality, the disappointment softens. Not because life gets better, but because you stop expecting it to be something it was never going to be. Adult life isn't what you expected, but it's what you have. And learning to live in what is instead of what should be might be the most adult thing you ever do.